This is Anne-Marie Leake, Vice President of Communications for ePay Resources. Welcome to the Payment Space.
I'm pleased to welcome Elizabeth McQuerry, partner at Glenbrook Payments, to this Payment Space podcast brought to you by ePay Resources. This is being recorded live at Notch's Smarter, Faster Payments 2024. I'm your guest host, Peter Davey, the Payments Jedi.
Hey, Peter. Good to see you. And wow, here we are at Payments, Notch Payments.
Another Payments. It looks like the energy here is pretty good this year. A lot of good attendees. A lot of good sessions so far.
Absolutely. I would agree with both of those.
So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what you do at Glenbrook?
I'm one of the partners at Glenbrook Partners, and we are totally focused on payments, right? That we're a payment strategy consulting firm. That's all we do. However, we do it across payment systems and all the stakeholders in the ecosystem. So we're deep in payments.
So you spent a good part of your career actually looking more at the global payments ecosystem. And one of the opportunities I think we've all seen as we've implemented FedNow and RTP, leveraging an ISO 20022 standard, is that we now have what I would call a fighting chance at some global cross-border capabilities. You're all speaking the same language, if you will, even though slightly different dialects. Can you talk about the need for global cross-border and what you think it's going to take in the U.S. to get there?
We're hearing a lot of discussion and even requests from our clients to think more about, cross-border. Of course, everyone has their own little view on, what they're working on. But one of the things is, from a consumer perspective, and we do serve a lot of merchants who then go out to the consumers or networks, have direct relationships with consumers. And, they just want to take out all of the complexity of a cross-border payment. They are happy to do ISO or any other format that's relevant, but they don't want to present it to their customer. And that's one thing here in the U.S. we're still trying to figure that out, right? What's part of the plumbing and what's part of the experience? And they're really two different things in this case with ISO.
So as we think about the fact that we now have two instant payment schemes in the U.S., how much do you think it's on the networks to try to drive those capabilities versus some of the counterparts in the industry?
Good question. I think if we're really just talking about moving to ISO 20022, obviously we're there. We may not have the exact same message format between them or with other counterparties globally. But that's not the hard part, right? Really with cross-border, it's more about how's the foreign exchange going to work? Where's the settlement going to happen? And when exactly? On whose time zone? Also, just the warranties, because when something goes wrong, in the unlikely case that it does, the impacts are even greater. And when we're talking about finality across borders, you can't get that back, right? So this, we need to take more careful steps here.
So, obviously in Europe, especially in the Eurozone, they figured out some fairly creative ways and schemas to be able to allow for more fluid transfer of payments across multiple zones. Is that a good model for us to start taking a look at, or where do you think it starts from a U.S. point of view?
Interesting comparison. They do have a good setup, but they start from the point that it's cross-border but not cross-currency. Everything that we do is more than likely going to be cross-currency as well as cross-border. And just now in 2024, SEPA, 10 years after starting with the European payments, they're actually adding a cross-currency capability that allows, the banks that want to make those sort of payments within the SEPA scheme. I think they call it something like one leg out.
I've also seen sort of a revitalization on Visa Direct and MasterCard Send to start trying to do more in the global cross-border side, leveraging the card networks. Is that a thing that we think would make it more accessible for banks in the U.S. as well?
I think it's already pretty accessible for them. Their numbers, to the extent that we understand them, are pretty impressive, right? And they both have moved well beyond the P2P capability, right? So they're serving more businesses, making more global connections. So I think that, if you're starting with maybe not having other cross-border providers, but you're already connected to one of those two networks, why wouldn't you do it that way, right? If it meets your customers' needs.
I think that's part of the challenge, right? So, financial institutions, especially on the smaller scale, really haven't seen cross-border as a strategy that they need to employ. However, it seems that from a consumer perspective and even a business perspective, more of our SMBs are doing cross-border activities. They need those services, and they may be buying it from the likes of a PayPal, or they may be buying it from the likes of Western Union or MoneyGram, or spending a lot of money on that. How important is it for financial institutions to really start looking at baking cross-border into their strategies?
Yeah, that's an excellent point because, businesses, just because they have their customers here doesn't mean they aren't buying things, inputs globally, supplies, services, and so they have all sorts of needs, just like a consumer, even if they're just plainly a U.S. business. And, I make a few cross-border payments myself. Glenbrook, we pay contractors, that sort of thing. So they may not be numerous, but they're just as important to our business and to our personal lives, right? And you're right, that's exactly missing in the classic setup of what's being offered to a small business like Glenbrook or any other small business consumer. You have to really go hunt for something specialized.
Yeah, recently we were over and had to pay a couple of contractors or service providers over in Ireland, and ended up leveraging the app Revolut, and was just amazed at how much more simple it was to be able to affect some of those cross-border transactions versus trying to do that through my normal bank.
And that's actually going to be interesting because if we don't, if you will, pay more attention to this soon, most everyone's already going to be on Revolut or Wise, and at least from a consumer perspective, why would you ever go back? It's so easy.
Yeah, and they charged me fees, but I kind of didn't care about it just because of the ease of use for the service. I'm not sure my bank could actually offer it at a much lower rate than what they were charging either.
Well, in my case, I use Wise for my transactions where I can, and my bank can't hold a candle to that.
So as you think about the adoption of real-time payments and instant payments within the U.S., I know that you do a lot of consulting with financial institutions. I'd like to say that everybody likes to brag that we're at 700 financial institutions on these rails. That to me means we still have about 7,700 to go to add on to make sure that we've got everybody there. Sort of what advice do you give your customers, your clients on where do they start? How should they be looking at the landscape, and why should they participate?
Of course, we have varied clients in different parts of the ecosystem, but if you are a fintech looking to build up and use the capabilities of others or build on something that's already existing, it's kind of hard to say, hey, have you looked at real-time payments, right? Because it's so distant from even being the ubiquitous option here in the U.S., much less for cross-border. And that's going to be also a disadvantage, I think, because we're going to find ourselves in contracts and other things that aren't with the real-time networks, and they may have just as good a proposition.
So we're at a payments conference. A lot of conversations going on. What are some of the top topics that you've picked up or insights while you've been here?
Well, really great attendance, and I've seen some very engaged audiences. And sometimes when you come to a conference, they're talking about all kinds of new stuff, and people have to digest it a bit, right? That's just normal. But people are coming more locked and loaded with their questions and engaged in newer sort of cutting-edge topics. And I think that's it's a good sign, right? They're ready for what the next step is, the next phase, to start thinking about it. And of course, we don't move quickly, but we need to do it confidently. And I think lots of good signs for that.
That's great to hear. Well, thank you, Elizabeth. Really appreciate you joining us today. Always a pleasure to chat with you.
You too, Peter.